Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Pankaj Sharma. I am the Executive Vice President of Schneider Electric's Secure Power Division and the data center business. For the next about 15 minutes, we're going to talk about the expanding role of data centers and how it is so important in the increasingly digital society. We're also going to talk about two of the biggest issues for the data center operators, which is around resiliency and sustainability. To help me do this, I have the pleasure of having Chris Kim, who's the Senior Vice President of Operations for Equinix, to join me today. So welcome, Chris. It's great to have you here.
It's great to be here. It's wonderful to get a chance to spend this time with such an important partner as Schneider Electric.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Chris, let's just take a couple of minutes to set the stage. Climate change, of course, is undoubtedly the defining issue of our times. I mean, it's essentially an energy challenge, considering over 80% of the global CO2 emissions are due to production and consumption of energy. And what's making it worse is that the way we use energy is highly inefficient. So we are now at a very critical juncture, and we need to be able to flatten the curve within this next decade. You know, it's interesting to think about it. It took us more than 100 plus years to get the planet to where it is, but we have just about 10 years left to go fix it. You know, in fact, a recent IPCC report, which was released in August, it actually reaffirms the urgency to act, and to act like now, literally in 9 years, and to rein in the emissions if we want to keep the 1.5C, obviously the threshold. Now, Chris, I know you're very passionate about this subject, so I'd like to hear your view on the climate change and what that means for all the businesses around us.
Yeah, I mean, I think we see it as critical on several levels. First of all, we're citizens, we're residents on planet Earth, right? And we're concerned about the planet we pass on to future generations. Second, we live in the world, and we've just experienced, recent weather events with seemingly ever more severe and extreme weather, powered in part by climate change. So, if it wasn't vivid before that there was an imperative to act, there is one. At the same time, Equinix has been interested in being a leader in this space and has repeatedly set out to demonstrate a leadership position. We made major commitments years ago to move to a 100% renewable energy strategy for our data centers. We were pleased by 2018, just 3 years into that process, to get to 90% of our total energy consumption being sustainable around the world. And so our plan is to continue to grow that till we reach that 100% model. And then just prior to the release of the most recent IPCC report you mentioned, Equinix made a new set of commitments, what we call science-based targets, around reducing our environmental impact and our greenhouse gas emissions to try to limit the growth of climate change to 1.5 degrees centigrade. And so that work has become central to what we're going to do between now and 2030.
Thank you for sharing your perspective, Chris. But let's move forward a little bit. At Schneider, we believe that electricity is one of the most efficient sources of energy. And obviously, it's also the best vector for decarbonization, right? Now, but we also believe that when you couple digital and electric together, we can actually use energy in a much smarter way. Simply because when you make the invisible visible, and if you eliminate waste and start to drive efficiency, that becomes the foundation of a new electric world. So that's something which we very strongly believe in. But it's also important to connect the dots. So we're talking about a fully electric world, which obviously the primary source has to be with renewables. But we have to be able to connect the dots with all the applications, data centers being one of them. In the last about 12 to 18 months, we've all lived through the COVID environment, we've seen a remarkable acceleration in the transition to digital. Now, this has been enabled to a large extent by companies like yourselves as Equinix, because you folks need to build more and more data centers. And you need to ramp up your services significantly, right? That's the need of the hour. Now, also in this digital world, what we are seeing now is that downtime and outages, which used to happen in the past, currently they are often becoming the highlight, or literally the high-profile headline. So which is one of the biggest issues. And on top of that, think about the growing awareness, just the overall public discussion around environmental impact, what's happening to the planet. and obviously how the data centers can actually contribute to that even more. So with all that said, and since Equinix is one of the biggest, digital infrastructure providers, how are you thinking about interconnecting these three pieces? So once again, the huge demand, the need for resiliency, and then at the end of all of that, the pressure that data centers could be, the biggest guzzlers.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're pointing out the dimensions of what's a really interesting set of challenges. I mean, on the one hand, the move to digital is probably a net benefit for our carbon emissions, right? When we substitute a video meeting for an airplane ride and a short session, the net carbon impact is probably advantaged. So the move to digital is in itself not necessarily a problem. It may in fact be part of the solution. That said, the sort of paradox of high uptime has always meant building redundancy and resiliency into systems, often by deploying multiples of something such that anything can break and everything will work, is inherently means that in a lot of cases you have two of everything when you really only are operating with one. So from a resource consumption perspective, it's not the most efficient thing we could imagine, but it's true that the operational reliability is tantamount. So, what our customers expect of us is really total availability, total consistency, dependability for their applications, and such that the foundation is always there. So when you consider the sustainability dimension, which those same customers are the ones asking for improvements, and in addition to our own desire to do so, it does require a new kind of innovation. How can we build the resilience without overbuilding the infrastructure?
What you're saying is so well related because we see this tension everywhere. And I like the way you're putting it. How do you build resiliency without overbuilding infrastructure and, of course, being sustainable? So these three challenges. No, great. This is a good example. Now, also, Chris, this, we at Schneider, we firmly believe that to meet the future needs of the data centers, we have to become more sustainable, efficient, adaptive, and resilient. Now, I think we all know that each one of the four vectors are equally important. So what that means is it actually needs a new mindset and a completely new approach to both meet today's needs, but also those of the future, again, without compromising the future generations like you articulated earlier. At Schneider, we believe there are 5 tenets that need to be deployed in combination so that we can create a holistic environmental sustainability strategy. Now, these 5 tenets being, starting with number 1, of course, the actionable strategy. It has to be a bold and actionable strategy. Secondly, around implementing efficient data center designs, and not just at the physical infrastructure, but also at the entire software layer and including the compute layer. Right? So it has to be super efficient, the design. We have to be able to drive efficiency in the operation. You build a great data center, you have to run it then. Ability to source more electric, which is more renewable, right? Only then the whole equation works. And finally, the supply chain, decarbonizing the supply chain, just scope 1, 2, and 3, right? So we talk a lot about these 5 tenets. I know Equinix uses these and even better in your daily business, but what's your view on how we can make this shift? So this is an interesting shift, right? We have to think about from resiliency or sustainability to resiliency and sustainability.
Yeah, and I think that's totally possible. I think that and statement, sustainability and resiliency, is achievable. And one of the reasons I think that is because we get a chance to work with Schneider. We, in fact, are customers and partners with you in all 5 dimensions of the way you've described sustainability. As an operations leader, that driving efficiency in operations resonates with me, not only because I know that a properly tuned data center is maximally efficient when you consider a power usage effectiveness measure, one of the ways we measure power usage in data centers and how well we're doing, but also because it means we have our hands on all of the controls and everything is in an optimal position. The reflection in PUE is actually a reflection of a well-run data center, which is less likely to suffer any sort of interruption of service. So there's this wonderful positive feedback loop as we build instrumentation, control systems, the things that make operational efficiency work to make the business better.
You mentioned, Chris, about instrumentation and control. Of course, the role of new technologies and techniques, and you mentioned that. Give us an example. Give all our viewers an example of what that looks like at Equinix, please.
Yeah, there's a few examples I might mention. The first is we've just opened a new building in the Silicon Valley area, what we call SV11. We're very creative in our naming structure. SV11 is the latest data center on the Great Oaks campus in San Jose. It is got a designed PUE of 1.17, which is remarkably low compared to data centers that were built 10 years ago. That data center is built as the first one in our portfolio where primary electrical generation comes from fuel cells, and secondary and resilient power comes from either the electrical grid or generators. Our expectation as we run this building is that we're going to prove that fuel cells can in fact be such a dependable primary source that the number of generators you'll need to deploy per building can be reduced in a way that still does not jeopardize the resilience or the uptime for customers. And so it's sort of a giant proof of concept of what's possible in the real world today. Another thing I'd mention is that Equinix, one of the ways that we're innovating is really taking what's going on in the software world as there's been this move to virtualization into the hardware space to start providing hardware at the speed of software. So we pre-provision servers and we sell a service called Equinix Metal where customers can buy a virtual server in near real time orchestrated through a web portal in many of our data centers around the world. By building that infrastructure ourselves, we get total control over the efficiency of the servers that are deployed, the cooling technologies that are used for them. It's letting us innovate with things like immersive cooling technologies that would allow us to drive greater densities.
Very good examples. SV11 is going to be a famous name, I can tell you after this event. But I think we both know, Chris, that this is a journey. It's not a end destination. We have to continue in this journey, and it's for every digital infrastructure provider. Now, can you tell us a little bit more where you're at today in this journey?
As I mentioned before, we've made this commitment to 100% renewables. In order to achieve our science-based targets that we've announced, we need to complete that journey by 2030. We are delivering 100% renewables in whole markets. Our center of excellence for energy efficiency in some ways it's about as sexy as when they tell you to improve your home efficiency, what you need is caulk. There's some basic technologies, airflow management, for example, that is at the root of getting the efficiency out of all the systems that contribute to cooling. But we are also making commitments to work deeply into our supply chain to make sure our biggest suppliers have their own targets for carbon reduction versus baseline levels. We are working to change our design to ever improve PUE and setting a design standard for hot climates and cooler climates to hit a minimum achievement around the world. There's stuff we're doing with energy generation, right? Both on the utility side where we're looking at fuel cells and then the possibility of green hydrogen powering those fuel cells. And then, new battery technologies are obviously super important to our business in providing resilient solutions. And then perhaps in the future playing a bigger role in things like grid stabilization, using the resources at our power to be a contributor. When we think about our role in the world, we want to be a great service provider. We want to be a great employer. I just want to be great neighbors, right? We want to be members of our community in good standing. And so that's why, as I mentioned before, educating the public about what the work is that we do and what we're doing in sustainability together is so important.
I feel very confident listening to what you said about how quickly we are moving in this world of new digital infrastructure. And I think companies like Equinix are obviously going to be the ESG leaders of the world. Now, the data center industry has a long and rich history of rethinking the status quo. We've always been innovative, and we've used innovation to solve very difficult problems. I think we are poised to do that again as we partner to reinvent and we build and manage data centers and digital infrastructure so that we can make more from, again, the resilience, efficient, adaptive, and the sustainability angle which we've been speaking about. So let me just try to take a minute or two to summarize. So the number one, again, it's a crude reminder, but the time to act on the climate change is actually now. It's the next decade. It's really not the next century, and we've spoken about this. What we do in the next 9 to 10 years will define our future for the planet, for ourselves, and for the future generations. A new mindset and approach is needed to data center operations, and it's crucial for a resilience and sustainability point of view. And I think there are examples which, Chris, you shared very gracefully on the ways to do it. So the point being that achieving sustainability and resilience in the data center operations is actually possible. And we see early innovators like Equinix, and you've heard so much from Equinix today, achieving this balance today. So a big thank you to you, Chris, and thank you, everyone.